Jim White. You're watching Time to Connect.
Hey, Jim White, man, thank you so much for taking the time to connect. I really appreciate it.
Hey, hey.
I've been a fan of yours for many, many years, and it's an honor to talk to you. I can't wait to get into hear some of your stories, and I've got I think, some pretty good questions for you. I want to hear about, so many things that you've done. My God, your biography is so fascinating. I know you've done some modeling. I have an idea for you to get back into modeling. You know the Dos Equis commercial is the most interesting man in the world. I think they need to replace that model with you. You are absolutely one of the most fascinating guys around. There's so many different things I want to hear. We can't touch on all those things, but want to hear a little bit about all the different things you've done and the just incredibly fascinating life you've lived. And mainly, we want to talk about your music, of course, and your songwriting. Let's talk about your daughter Willow. I know that you're getting into producing these days, so I want to ask you about that. I first became aware of you, what year would that have been, with Handcuffed to a Fence in Mississippi?
Oh, that came out 2001. That was on the record No Such Place.
Yeah, a friend of mine turned me onto that, and soon thereafter I saw you on Letterman doing the Power of Love song, 10 miles to go on a 9-mile road. But I got to tell you, man, what really drew me into Jim White's world was when I watched the film In Search of the One-Eyed Jesus.
Well, correct title is Searching for the Wrong-Eyed Jesus.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, sorry.
I've heard thousands of variations of it.
Yeah.
And it seems to be one that trips people up, perhaps because there's some sacrilege involved in it or something. I don't know, but yeah, we get one-eyed a lot. That's one of the main ones.
Interesting. That's really interesting. But let's start, if you don't mind, and of course this would take the whole hour. But how do you? I mean, I know this is a real challenge for you, but how do you kind of give your potted biography? If you were asked to say who is Jim White in a minute or two, how would you possibly boil that down? What do you typically say?
Well, I guess I'd say that I was a person without a lot of identity, like core identity. And so when something would come up, I wouldn't say, "Oh, that's not me." So when the modeling thing came up, it was like, "Okay, I'll try that." When I was a taxi driver, I was like, oh, "Okay, I'll try that." Um, I didn't have that central focus of ID. So I've just done a lot of different things, culminating with this work as a songwriter. I mean, I started that 25 years ago. Prior to that, I'd never done any job for more than a couple of years.
And we don't have time to tell the whole David Byrne story, but one of the things that I will do here, Jim, is I'll put links in the show notes for people to. One link I'll put is I can't remember where it is. It's a podcast or something where you tell that whole story about not only about you, quote, stalking David Byrne, but then also him getting that cassette of yours in his hand and just his hands, and just a fascinating story there. I'm curious, do people still stop you in New York thinking you're David Byrne?
No, it hasn't happened since that period. And I write about it in my book. I wrote a book. I call it a magical realism memoir, because there was a series of events that happened to me over the course of about 10 years when I was having a mental health struggle. I was living in New York and I was kind of spiraling into madness. And as I got closer and closer to the edge, these bizarre coincidences started happening. And one of them was that I had I moved to New York in the middle of it, and had a white suit that I bought at a thrift store because I thought I need a suit to wear, and didn't know that the movie was about to come out. So I rode around New York City a lot looking for work in my white suit. And whenever I wore I called it my magic white suit, because whenever I wore it, people would kind of smile at me and perk up and wave and heads would turn. And I thought it's so strange. And then I wore it to a dance club one night because I was a born again Christian, and I was trying to undo all of the religious Calvinistic, uptight bullshit that was making me crazy. So I went to like a hardcore New York dance club, and I thought they would laugh at me because I was just this weird guy from North Florida. Um, but instead, everybody wanted to dance with me, and they started doing this, to me. And I
Mm.
thought, oh, this is a new dance. So I did it
Yeah.
back to them. And let me tell you, when I did that to them, they were just agog because they thought they were chopping with David Byrne, not with
Yeah.
some. I was a dishwasher at that point.
And what's so fascinating is how then later David Byrne ends up being instrumental in kind of launching your musical career. But yeah, I'll put a link up in the show notes. People can go listen to that story. It's a terrific story. You mentioned mental illness, and it's something that I've heard you talk about a lot. And that brings me to a question I wanted to ask you in particular. And that's this idea of, the tortured artist producing art. I've heard Jeff Tweedy and others talk about how that's kind of a myth and that you don't need to be unhappy and tortured to produce good art. And I get that, and I totally feel it. But at the same time, I have to be honest, Jim, and say the best songs I've written, the best paintings I've made, the best poems I've written do come out of a time when I'm disconnected. I'm sad. I'm feeling some need to reconnect with the world, and that creation that I'm making kind of tends to be that lifeline that hopefully gets me back to some form of sanity. So I wonder how you think about this idea of the tortured artist, and do we need to be sad in order to make great art, etc.
Well, number one, I think there's a great danger in promoting the notion as being an ideal. Um, I, my mental health struggles, all I wanted to do was get better. And if making art made me get better, that was fine. And if I stopped writing great songs, there's some argument that I have. Um, and I talked to David Byrne about this actually. He's kind of the same mind. He's like, well, do you think that you know, we've gotten healed enough to where we don't have to be artists anymore? My goal is to get better. I remember I was in an art class in junior college when I was about 19, and the allure of being an artist was floating around in my mind because I was very different than other people. Um, and the teacher showed pictures painted by, I think it was Hieronymus Bosch. He painted portraits of hell and agony, and then he became a devout Catholic, and he started painting these boring pastoral scenes. And the teacher lamented how sad it was that he found Catholicism because his tortured work was so much better. And I just raised my hand and said, well, which is more important, to make weird, crazy art, or to be able to live in your skin? Yeah. So my goal always with any art that I do, it's therapy. That's why I never bothered to try to, present it to the world. When David Byrne heard my cassette tape, literally maybe 10 people in the world had ever heard my music. And so I think that there was something in that fact that drew him to it. If I'd been trying to get heard saying, look at my agony and torture, and oh, look how freaky I am, I think he would have just thrown it on the pile with the 10,000 other submissions I saw in his office. I was aiming for healing. And I think that both him and Yale Eveleth, the guys that run the label, heard that in the music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, right on. Let's talk about your songwriting. Is it happen in any consistent way for you, or is it just the hard work? Is it ideas come to you? Do you wake up in the middle of the night with a song in your head? Is there any typical way that it comes to you?
Well, there's two primary modes. One is the aesthetic route, because writing songs is hard for me. I don't have brilliant thoughts that just come tumbling out of me. The stuff that comes tumbling out of me comes usually at the flea market, when I'm walking the aisles of the flea market, and I overhear some little bit of language, and it's rural Southern language, and I just extrapolate on it as I'm walking around, not thinking, not saying, let me write a song. It's just on one of the records I did, I can't remember what it was, two records ago. I was walking by a guy, and he said to his friend, I don't hold with no blue-eyed girls. and I'd never heard that expression before. I don't hold. And I started kind of like walking around, and I don't hold with no blue-eyed girls. And then I remembered Ernest T. Bass from the Andy Griffith Show. He was a hillbilly, a lunatic hillbilly character who would come into town on a full moon every couple of years and throw rocks through people's windows and court women and do all that. And I thought that's what he'd say. And so I wrote a whole easy song. Those are the easy songs. They just come popping out. It's
Yeah.
not deep, it's not meaningful. It's just something fun to do. And then there's the ascetic songs, which, like Static on the Radio is my biggest song. It took me 5 years of writing to write that song. And it wasn't 5 years every once in a while. It was weeks at a time, moving the word "the" from line 6 to line 7 and then back. And I didn't have it finished when we got to the recording with Joe Henry producing. I had the last verse not finished, and it was a Friday when we recorded the tracks. And he said, "You need to do a vocal," and I said, "It's not finished." And he said, "Well, Monday morning it will be." And
Yeah.
after 5 years of wallowing in my own internal maze, it was real nice to have some external force say, "It will be done."
Yeah.
So I got kind of desperate because Monday was coming. And I remembered when I was driving a cab and I was writing songs, the answers would often come to me after spending, a full day working on a single verse, 8 hours, 10 hours writing, you know, 1,000 variations of a verse. And then I would get in the cab, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, getting on the Cross Bronx Expressway, the whole thing would come solved into my mind.
Yeah.
Do you know the mathematician Poincaré?
Yeah. I'm
He's
familiar.
a French mathematician, and he was working on some formula, like some unprovable theorem that he thought could be solved. And he worked on it for years, blackboards in his office covered, with equations. And finally, he just gave up and said, "There's no way to solve this." And he erased all the blackboards. And a few months later, he was getting on a train, and he put his hand on the railing, and the
Yeah.
whole thing came solved. And you know what he did? He did all the hard work. He
Right.
drove the question into his deeper intelligence
Right.
and let his subconscious sort it out. That's the type of song that people like that I write.
Mm.
Those songs that took a dive down in the deep part of me and came up of their own volition. Static on the Radio is one.
Mhm.
5 years of my ego blocking it being able to say what it wants to say, and then all of a sudden I let go, and someone gave me this little nudge in a different direction, and all the words came out. I'm proud of the words in that song.
Yeah, absolutely. Two of my favorite songs of yours are Bluebird. What a great song, man. And Jailbird. Uh, how do those, what category do you put those two songs in terms of your approach to writing them?
Yeah, those were not easy songs to write.
I bet.
And in fact, in the song Bluebird, there's in the third verse, it describes my struggle and how another person gave me. I mean, I wrote it about my Willow, whose birthday is today. Um, but I just fought and fought and fought with it. And like, Eskimos, they have this elaborate vocabulary of words for snow. Well, I had this elaborate vocabulary of words for sorrow, and depression, and all of the peripheral mental states that accompany an outsider not fitting in and being sad about it. And I was trying to write a song to her. She, when she was born, I wanted to write her a song to tell her how much I loved her, but it just kept being full of junkies and murders and crime. And I worked, and I had beautiful verses written, but they were just sad. And I played it for her. She was 3, and she was in the living room, and it was just her and me there. And I played her the 2 verses and said, "What do you think?" And she said, "Dad, it's sad and way too long." And I,
Yeah,
and
you work
and
that into the song. Yeah.
put that into the song. Okay, the struggle is solved by someone other than the tortured artist.
Yeah.
If the tortured artist has to solve everything, then the tortured artist needs to go look in the mirror and do an ego check.
Yeah.
Let's let grace come through the window or through the door rather than from our own self promotion.
Yeah. And a story I've heard you tell is kind of another version of that about Tom Waits talking to the to the homeless guy on the street taking notes.
Yeah,
And
that's in the book too.
yeah, and I'm sorry I wasn't aware of the book. What's the title? I definitely want to pick that up.
Well, it's called Incidental Contact.
Okay.
And I wrote it during COVID. I won a big literary prize just in a freaky, weird twist. I'm not a writer per se, but I was asked to write a couple stories for this startup magazine called Radio Silence, and the first one I wrote, the guy wrote back and said, "Everybody loves this; it's their favorite story, and write another one." And I had already sketched out the David Byrne story. It's called Super White, and so I sent it to him, and we fought about it because he wanted to make it shorter, and I wanted to make it longer. Like that's my want. He eventually talked me into publishing it with his edits. He was a big shot at the National Endowment of the Arts and a literary mover and shaker. And I know about Ezra Pound, editing the way T.S. Eliot's work, and I know that sometimes you need someone to rein you in. So he put the shortened version of it, a truncated version of it in, and it won a Pushcart Prize award, which is the biggest short story prize in America.
That's great.
And I was up there getting the award with all these people that won Pulitzer Prizes and famous writers, and they were asking me, well, when's your novel coming out? And I was like, I don't have time to write a novel. I'm a hand-to-mouth musician. I just barely get by. I'm raising kids and paying for braces and prom dresses and things like that. And so then COVID hit, and I thought, well, this is my chance. So I sat down and wrote it, and I sent it off to some literary agents, and they all agreed that it was interesting and compelling. The one who liked it the most told me I needed to rewrite it for a female audience. and I said, why? And she said, women buy 90% of the books that are sold. And I thought that was, smart and savvy, but it wasn't really the story I wanted to tell. And then the next one told me I needed to shorten it by 100 pages. And I said, do you think it's too long or boring? And she said, no, I can't sell it unless it's a certain page length. And I thought, well, this is starting to sound like the music industry, and I want to write this book to tell my story, not to make money or be famous. So I just self-released it. That was in 2021 or 20 something like that. And it's had a good run. We've sold copies. It's never gotten the traction that I think, frankly, it deserves. It's a story about mental health struggles and sitting on the edge of the world, teetering back and forth, and how kind of, if you allow it, grace can descend and offer you a hand that you can't, present to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely would pick that book up. What's the best way to get a copy?
Oh, off the website, you can order it.
Okay.
JimWhiteMusic.net. And I'm about to do this run. I don't tour much, but I'm running up to New York to see my daughter play at Madison Square Garden with Cage the Elephant. And after that, I'm doing a run of Canadian shows. And I expect by the time I get back, I'm going to be out and have to do a reprint because I'm selling more than I expected as a self-releaser.
Well, excellent. You'll get my order soon. You
Okay.
talked about mentioned just now about grace, which brings to mind your last verse in Jailbird.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask you about one word in Jailbird. Earlier, talked about how you work on moving words around and how it's it's kind of a tough labor sometimes. Kind of
It's agonizing. It's not a tough labor. It's agonizing. And you
It'll
just
drive you
want to throw
crazy.
your hands in the air and quit. And you walk away and you come back and you walk away and you come back. And sometimes with me, that goes on for months. I'm working on right now like that.
Yeah, I was in one of the other episodes of this podcast. I talked to Tim Rutilli of the band Caliphone, and he said, "Man, writing songs is fucking hard." And I said, "Yeah, I know. What do you mean by that?" And he just said, "It's fucking hard." It's all he would say, and I get it. But one word choice that just to me is, I don't know. I may be the only person in the world that feels this way, but I'm playing that song now. By the way, I'm covering that song of yours, Jailbird, and I've listened to it so much, and I really love the YouTube version that you do with your buddy back in your hometown playing harmonica.
Oh yeah, Pat Pulaski. Yeah.
such a great little version of that song. But the word damn, when you say, I want to be a jailbird from the prison of my own damn mind. You know,
Yeah.
you could have just said, I want to be a jailbird from the prison of my mind, and that would have scanned just fine in that song. But I don't know what it is, that just that one word to me is just devastating.
Wow.
Did that just come to you naturally, or is that something you worked on, and do you remember?
Um, well, for one, in a sort of a practical sense, I hear percussively, so I don't sing long notes. So I needed something there,
You had a
and
solo there.
um, the torment of being me at times in my life is what I was writing about, was that I want to walk away from me. It's interesting. I was engaged to a woman who had a sort of a shamanic practice. She's an amazing human being, and she did this. It's not ayahuasca, but it's like ayahuasca. I think she called it awana. And before we got married, she wanted me to sit with her doing it, and so I did. We sat in a room together, and after a while, I didn't really notice much happening to me. She was kind of in a spiritual trance. I didn't notice much happening to me, but then I noticed I'd been staring at a tree for about, I don't know how long it was. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been 10 minutes. But the the, the mental clatter that is the centerpiece of my mind had gone, and it was a real beautiful feeling.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't want to come to it artificially. I want to come to it, by way of either grace or by hard work or a combination of the two.
Mhm.
So I don't pursue that lifestyle, going and going into this spiritual realm. I grew up in a spiritual world, this deep South Pentecostal world. So I have a bit of wariness about people saying there is God,
Mhm. Yeah.
because usually when they say there is God, God is nowhere to be found in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Also in that song, and you kind of just made reference to it there. There's the line about disappearing, leaving yourself behind, disappearing. I actually just talked to Willie Vlotton, of Richmond Fontaine fame, and terrific novelist, and had a wonderful conversation with him. And we talked about that quite a bit. This idea of disappearing, and it's. I realize that it kind of shows up in some of my songs too. I'm curious what that means to you. This idea of leaving yourself behind and disappearing. What does that mean to you?
I studied philosophy at NYU, in fact,
Yeah.
and the teacher was talking about. He was the most illustrious professor. He was the head of the religion department. James Carse was his name. He had a show on NPR, so he was a real deep thinker. And he was talking about being in the moment. And so he was talking about the goal of being in the moment. And it's popular terminology now, but it wasn't back when he
Right.
was telling me about it.
Right.
And so I raised my hand and said, Carse, how can someone be in the moment? And he started explaining it. And I went, well, but wait, if they're in the moment and they're thinking about being in the moment, they're not completely in the moment. How
Nope.
about we say that you're 80% in the moment or 70%? Let's aim for a good percentage, because no one can ever be in the moment except a woman who's given birth to a baby and a man who has a gun put to his head, and the trigger just got pulled, but it misfires. You're in the moment in those places. I was in the moment once in my life. Um, and I write about that in the book too. I got thrown in. I got assaulted by a guy and thrown into the path of a car, and I shit my pants and was flying through the air as the car was coming towards me. And I wasn't thinking about bills to pay. I wasn't thinking about anything. I wasn't thinking about,
Yeah.
will I get hurt? I was just there.
Right.
There's a new science called flow science. Do you know about that?
Sure.
Stephen Kotler.
Mikhail Chisel, one of the authors was a Slavic author.
I don't
Wrote a
know.
book called Flow. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Stephen Kotler is my connection to it. He's
Okay.
a friend, and he's written a bunch of books about flow. He got interested in it. He's a sort of a pop culture expert, and a neuroscience expert. So he wrote the first book. It's called West of Jesus, and it's about flow states in surfing. And he wanted to
Okay.
get my opinion about it. Stephen Kotler, and he works with a guy named Peter Diamandis a lot. Peter Diamandis is like this futurist. He's a protege of Ray Kurzweil. Do you know who Ray Kurzweil is? Yeah, he wrote.
Sure.
I guess Kurzweil is most famous among musicians for those Kurzweil keyboards. But he was an inventor who came up with an astonishing amount of innovations, and then he got mad because they were becoming obsolete in his lifetime. So he decided he would invent for the future. So he wrote a book in the 70s about things that would be invented in the future, and predicted, I think there's like 110 things in it, and 107 of them have come to pass.
Wow.
But Cutler talked to me a lot about flow,
Yeah.
And how, every once in a while, if you shed ego enough, you
Yeah.
can you can just let something larger in. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
Jung called it the collective unconsciousness. You can let something larger in, but there's a lot of hokum and marketing surrounding it that's
Sure.
making it a little more difficult to access. And that's why the people are going to the rainforest and taking ayahuasca and things like that. They want to have experience what that feeling is like. But the more deliberately you aim at it, the more it runs away.
Mhm.
I think that state of mind is shy, and you have to kind of surrender in various ways that are deflating to the ego, and
Yep.
a challenge to people, particularly in this hyper objectified 20th century late stage capitalism mindset that we've been put in, where we have to have a specific identity and
Yep.
a specific set of clothes and a specific taste in music. And you remember when you were growing up, there was 3 radio stations in town. You
Right.
listened to
That's right.
country, you listened to pop, or you listened to classical.
That's right. Yeah.
Now there's 400 subgenres of every single one of those
Yeah.
divisions.
Yeah. And you layer onto that the culture of busyness that we're all in. People
Right.
are it's kind of like everyone's ADD. Now, by the way, since you brought up Carse, I will tell you that I'm looking over here at my bookshelf. I don't see it. There's a terrific little book that he published of little essays. Do you know the book?
Finite and Infinite Games.
No, something about breakfast.
Breakfast at the Victory Diner.
Man, boy,
Yeah.
there's one essay in particular in that book that just blows my mind. But I was a university professor for many years, and I had that flow experience a lot, Jim. When I would be lecturing, sometimes it's like I would forget that I'm a separate being. I would forget who I am. I no self-consciousness. It all just melts away. I remember one time in particular, someone asked a question, and I went back over to the podium to look at something up on the computer, and the computer screen acted like a mirror. And I saw myself, and it was that moment of, oh, I'm me. I'm separate. The ego just comes right back online. I I don't know. I totally agree with you that there's been a lot of kind of hokey marketing pop culture around this, and probably caused by
Just do it. The Nike, just do it. See how
yeah,
we're just doing it? Well, we're
yeah,
not just doing it. We're being
we're not.
manipulated by a
That's
bunch
right.
of Madison Avenue marketers.
That's right. But if it's Alex Honnold climbing that wall in Yosemite, there's his separate sense of self was gone. Had to be.
That's a spiritual quest. It's
That
it's
is a,
not it's not simply an athletic deed. It's a spiritual quest.
amen. Amen.
Yeah.
And I've had that moment playing music too. Not as much, but I have had those because it's a little different when there's an audience sitting watching you, and it's hard to get over that self-consciousness of you're performing. But I definitely have, being a front man too, it's a little different than kind of being one of the guys on the side. But I've had that moment. And in fact, when I talked to Bill Frisell, what an American treasure, he told me, I asked him, I said, Bill, you're in your 70s and you're touring like a madman. How do you do it? And he said, well, I get tired, and when we travel someplace and I get checked into the hotel and I say, I'm not sure I can do this gig tonight. He said, but as soon as I start playing, all that melts away. And he's in that flow. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's a beautiful thing, man. Beautiful thing. Well, I know it's a theme that shows up in your music a lot, and I really appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about Willow. I know you're a proud dad. And you could probably talk a lot about Willow, but what's going on? What's going on with Willow, Dad?
Well, my daughter goes by stage name Willow Avalon. It's her birthday today. Happy birthday, Willow, if you
Happy
listen.
birthday, Willow.
Yeah. She growing up, she had a real hard time in school. Um, they always had to segregate her, and they said she was ADD, and lots of complications. And she ended up in real trouble in her teens, and then dropping out of high school and running away and living in her car. And it was a parenting ordeal of a high order.
Yeah.
I did a couple of things right. One was I got her. I forced her to take piano lessons, so she learned how to. And man, that teacher, she deserved a medal. My daughter would, couldn't sit still, fidgeting, jumping, sticking her tongue out at the teacher. But the teacher, Miss Little, she stayed with Willow and taught her the fundamentals. Once Willow had the fundamentals, she could extrapolate and start framing her own message with the music that was in her. The other thing that I got her that helped her more than anything was a go-kart. she yeah, it was her birthday and I got her a go-kart. So this was probably on this day, she was maybe 8 years old, and she's just having so much trouble. She couldn't sit still. She was disruptive in class. And I pulled up to her school in my truck with a go-kart in the back and showed her, and she freaked out. We drove it here to my house. I've got 2 acres around my house. And I showed her how it worked. I started, the engine, and I said, that's the gas pedal. Don't press hard on that. That's the brake, hit that. And she climbed in and mashed that gas pedal down. And I saw her, power sliding around the corner of the house, and I thought, my daughter's going to die. And she looked scared. By the time she came around the other side of the house, she was on 2 wheels and she had a grin on her face. And the thing landed, bounced twice, and she went past me. And every time she came, because it was split visitation, the first thing she did, she got in that, and she showed that she was somebody who could do something. Her friends would come over, and they were scared to go 1/10 the speed that she went. She was just built for speed. So when she got out there to LA, she moved out there without a job, without references, without any savings, and a truck full of furniture that was, the truck was going to be due back in 4 days. I just thought, well, I'm going to hear from the sheriff or the hospital, or, someone's going to call and say, come get your daughter. 3 days in, she called and said, Dad, I got an apartment in Silver Lake. And I didn't want to doubt her. I just said, are you sure? Are you sure? She said, I did. I got us one because, when I put my mind to it, I can do something. And she's never graduated high school, but she is 10 times smarter than most college graduates, master's degree people. She just needed to be in the right environment for her intelligence to blossom. When the record company people started courting her, they treated her like, another pretty face. And she taught them not to do that in short order. They know at this point that she's someone worth listening to. She's got a record deal with Atlantic Records. She's got videos with 35 million views, and 34 million views, I guess. And she's a staple on Spotify, I guess, or one of those streaming services. And I'm so proud of her that she fought her way through the turmoil of her teen years in particular, and she's a clear thinker now. Yeah, so
Really beautiful.
That's half the show right there. Just me bragging on her.
Happy birthday to Willow. This may be an easy question. I don't know. What do you think is the main thing that fatherhood has taught you?
Oh, to take my head out of my ass.
Yeah, yeah.
It gave me. I remember when she was born. I I was so excited that at an early age I was saying, look at this, 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 kind of like this chaotic squirrel on the treadmill mind that I have, and I realized after a while that I was not helping her, that I was making her crazy with my craziness. So I tried to learn to tone down um, my enthusiasm at having someone to connect to, and be a guiding hand. I'd always been just this lone crazy person. Suddenly I needed to be stable and calm for the sake of my kids. So that's probably the best thing that I learned was, put yourself aside and just be dad.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I've realized, I've got a couple of daughters, and I'm not sure why I didn't understand this earlier, but you just have to live through the experience. Parenting is, the decisions you make, the rules you make, the boundaries you set, all that's important. But the most important thing is who you are, man, because they are looking to you. You are role models and for them, and they're watching you more than you realize. And so
Oh boy,
be,
yeah.
be a decent human being, and they're liable to turn out to be decent as well.
You
Well,
got to be an anchor for your kids.
yeah.
When she was young, she was my anchor, and I realized somewhere that was unfair. She was my anchor to sanity and to all those things, and so I thought I have to be sane for her, not you know as a result of her.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Thank you for that. That really cuts deep for me right now, by the way. Jim, let me finish here with throwing some kind of quick answer questions at you, if that's okay.
we'll try. I'm not good at them usually.
Yeah, and if you wanna have a longer answer to these, then that's fine. I know you're also a visual artist. Are you still making art, and how would you describe the paintings that you make?
Well, there are assemblages. I have a house you can see behind me. My house is full of stuff. I have sort of a very reflexive mind. I see something, and it pinballs me over to something else, to something else, and something else. So I just fill my house up with things to see. And then on certain occasions when I'm totally fed up with writing songs or writing stories, and I'm just sitting there stewing in my own juices, my eye will look over at something, and I'll realize, oh, in the other room, I've got this thing. It's once again, it's just a form of therapy, creating them. And there's this arc. You start as it being therapy, and then if you get good enough, people start paying attention, and they start wanting to buy things, and then you start thinking, oh, I need to make more of those things that people could buy, because as musicians we
Yes.
live hand to mouth. and
Yes.
then and then the corruption sneaks in, and you start thinking,
Yep.
huh, this one isn't selling as good as my other ones are selling. And pretty soon the thing that was therapy isn't anymore. Music for me right now, not therapy. It's a craft that I've learned, but the therapy stage of it is over. Because I've released records. I've been on, like you say, on Letterman. I've had hit records. I was number 17 on Amazon with one of my records, and what it did was it sort of just shuffled that experience of making music into a different category. It's not a bad category. It's great that I can make a living making music, but it's not the sole therapeutic entity that it used to be. I used to just sit alone in my room and write songs day and night and day, doing what one of my teachers called the talking cure. And as you can see from your short answer question,
Yeah.
I'm still doing the talking cure.
That's okay. So I brought up Tom Waits earlier. I love that story you tell about swordfish trombones, and you bought it for a friend, and I think it was swordfish trombones
Yeah,
record.
well, yeah,
And
yeah.
and you said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll take that off your hands," and you wore the grooves out. Waits has also meant a lot to me. Who are some of the other, just maybe name check some other musicians, songwriters who have had an influence on you?
Well, someone who was connected to him, Ricky Lee Jones, um, and I got to open for her a couple of years ago. She came to a show of mine, and right after Wrong Eye Jesus came out, and told me that I was doing good work and to keep up. And you could have laid me in the earth and thrown the dirt, and I wouldn't have stopped smiling because I was so honored. So she was a big influence. But I didn't follow artists per se. I'm not built that way.
Okay.
I follow incidents. So, seeing Julian Bream playing a guitar etude on the BBC while I was living in Europe in exile, and saying, "Wow, I think I could write one like that." I never bought any of his records or anything. I just heard him in that flash of that moment. So it's more anecdotal and incidental than it is thematic.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I guess Tom Waits really had the biggest effect on me musically, but Moondog, um, I thought a lot about arrangements in relation to him, and Philip Glass, who I write about in the book as well, because I had a series of encounters with him that were inexplicable. Um, so the list is kind of long, and I'm not real good at data
Yeah,
retrieval.
that's okay. That's
I'd
okay.
say Bobby Gentry is another one.
Mhm.
Just something happened. Steely Dan,
Mhm.
musically, their arrangements. I know that
Yeah,
people kind of
incredible.
trash them, but those arrangements are
Uh,
like
Amazing.
never in pop music has that happened. Recently, Sir John Stevens.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about Dylan? You ever get much into Bob Dylan?
Um, the songs were deeply meaningful to me, but I didn't feel that I would intersect them anyway with any meaningful activity of my life.
Okay.
Whereas when I heard Tom Waits, I felt like he and I are wandering in the same path. It didn't feel like that with Dylan. I felt like he was way up here
Yeah.
somewhere that
Yeah.
that was different.
Yeah.
I got to play with Dylan's bass player, Tony
Okay.
Garnier, and I didn't know who he was. We were doing a festival in Europe, and he's playing along. And I'm like, God damn, this guy's good, because the festival brought a band, Tony
Ah,
Garnier, Gustav Lund, I can't remember his last name. It's a long Scandinavian name, and a piano player from Argentina. And I'm just thinking, man, this bass player is great. And he's talking about Bob this and Bob that. And finally, I said, "Who's this Bob you keep talking about?"
oh,
and he
some guy
looked at
named
me and he
Bob
said,
Zimmerman. Yeah.
"Yeah,
Yeah.
Bob
Hey,
Zimmerman."
where are you living now? I had the impression for some reason you living in New York City.
Oh
No?
no, I,
Where
I,
do you
I
live?
lived there for about 15 years. I'm living in rural Georgia, outside of Athens. This is Winterville,
Yeah.
and Winterville's a sweet little town with a nice musician mayor, and it's progressive. And this is where my kids have grown up. I'm probably within a couple of years going to move somewhere. I don't know where yet. I used to be an ocean person. I lived on oceans most of my life, and I
Right.
miss it. I stayed here for my kids, and they're not in need of my presence here anymore. So
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah,
don't know where I'll go yet.
I knew about Florida, and I knew you had lived in Georgia. You did live in New York for a time.
15 years, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, got it. Uh, this is probably an impossible question, but if not an artist, what would you what could you have done with your life if art, music and art didn't work out?
It
What
would
do
have
you see
needed to
yourself?
be something I could do alone, because I have issues with authority. I have like
Yeah,
profound issues with authority.
yeah,
Any straight job I've ever had, I quit or got fired within a short amount of time, because um, I had to, in order for things to make sense, I had to find my own way to do it.
mhm,
And in any kind of corporate hierarchy,
yeah.
that doesn't fly.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know what it would have been.
Taxi
Um,
driver, I know you did some taxi driving for a while. That might be something.
11 years of taxi driving in New York City. Yeah. But that was when I was losing my mind.
Mhm.
And the cab driving wasn't helping things by any means. It was a hard way to, to grind out a living.
What are you listening to now? What are some things that you've listened to recently?
I don't listen to music much.
Really?
Um, I make music all the time,
Yeah.
and I don't. My ears need a rest. I saw the Tiny Desk concert by Feist, and was deeply moved by. I wrote a post about it on Facebook. Her arrangements, and her very beautiful angular view of reality put me in mind of Sir John Stevens, who I listened to for years. My daughters and I loved listening to him. It was something that we could all listen to. But other than that, I don't go looking for music. I've got a record player over there. I don't turn it on. You know, people send me records sometimes and I'll listen to them if I'm going to produce their record. Like Ben De La Cour sent me his record. And there's a guy, Thomas Kozak, who nobody knows about. I produced a record for him called The Rubicon, and I listened to it. I like to think he's kind of like a Southern Nick Drake, you know.
Mm.
Um,
Wow.
he kind of has his own world, and he mixes like pop culture ideas with Greek mythology, with strange religious ideas, and it all comes together in this very seamless, beautiful form. So if I'm going to produce a record for someone, I listen to their music nonstop. First of all, to see if I think I can help them. And if I can't, I don't produce a record. But then if I do think I can, then I'll listen to it all the more, waiting for the subconscious to take over and understand the music so the subconscious can tell me what to do.
Nice. Yeah. Are you much of a reader? Are you reading much these days? It seems like it's those of us who have been readers our whole life, it's harder and harder to sit down and read a book these days. This culture of busyness is really affecting us. But I'm really making an effort to read. How about yourself?
Um, the only reading I do is on the computer. And
Okay.
I used to read a book a week,
Yeah.
every week of my life, starting in my 20s when I got over whatever ADD issues I had. I was living in Europe and there was no TV to watch, and so I started reading then. And I demanded that I read a book a week, and that's kind of how I educated myself. I kind of like faked my way through school, and then when I got out, didn't have any ideas in my mind, but I had a mind hungry for ideas. So uh, I went to Europe, and the modeling thing was going on. And unlike all the other models who were out partying, I was trying to educate myself. So I'd sit in my little hotel room, and the first books that I tried were The Idiot by Dostoevsky and The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, because my father thought those would be good books to start with. It's
Oh
like
boy.
that's a thumbnail sketch of my dad right there.
Yeah.
And I was riding on a tram one day going to a go-see, you know, where you show your portfolio with a beautiful model. She was real smart, and she said, "What are you reading?" And I said, "This." And she said, "Oh, how do you like it?" It's Dostoevsky. And I said, "It's really hard. I've never read before, and I'm just trying to learn." And she reached in her purse and she said, "Try this instead of that." She took the Dostoevsky away from me and she gave me a Kurt Vonnegut book.
Oh,
And,
nice. Yeah.
I can't remember which one it was, Breakfast of Champions or something like that. But um, all of a sudden, everything made sense. So I read every Vonnegut book
Yeah.
for over and over, many, many times until my reading ability improved to the point where I could read more complicated stuff.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Vonnegut
Thank you,
was
Kurt Vonnegut.
absolutely. Jim, last question. It's a weird one. You, you know, you're a guy, a lot of inexplicable things have happened to you. And I know you've talked about that and read about that. I'm sure you've dealt with the question of mortality and this age-old philosophical question, what the hell happens when we die? Is that something you have any concept of? Do you think about it how old are you now?
67.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm 68. As we march a little closer to the inevitable light at the end of the tunnel, do you think about what happens? Is this something you even bother thinking about, or or do you
Got
have
another hour?
Yeah.
We're on the slippery slope now, and more, you know, you open your email and someone's gone.
Yeah.
My best friend died about 6 years ago, and he had cancer and he fought real hard. And at the end, I told him, you know, I've known 3 people who have died and come back to life, and I've asked them what it's like, and they all report the same thing. They say it was the most blissful feeling that they ever had, and that they felt like they had escaped a nightmare and they were finally free.
Mm,
So I had this idea when I was 15. I read the Owl Creek incident. Do you know that story?
I don't.
The Owl Creek incident is like this first real pop culture uh, arrival of an idea that mainstream culture could grab a hold of about time and how time is a human construct. In the Owl Creek incident, a guy is a criminal and he escapes on a bridge, and he leaps off the bridge and he lands in the water, and he swims, and they're shooting at him, and he makes his way and they chase him, and he eventually escapes, and he gets back home and he opens the door and his wife's there, and all of a sudden he feels a snap, and it turns out what has happened is he originally was being hung off a bridge. As he was falling, he created this whole scenario of him breaking free and swimming away, but he didn't. Then the thing caught and he died. So in the fraction of 2 seconds as he was falling, he created an expansive year of time, right? And I read that as an impressionable kid and thought, okay, if time can be compressed, let me compare that to the stories of the people who have died, because one of the first ones I talked to, it was when I was a teenager. And he remembers being under the sail of a sailboat in the bay in Pensacola, where we grew up. And he said, and then I started seeing family members, and then I started seeing experiences that I had. And I saw all these things, and then suddenly someone was pulling me out of it. And he was underwater for maybe a minute, but he lived a year or 10 years. And that made me think, okay, maybe we can, when that time comes for the body to say, goodbye, mind, I can't make it anymore. Maybe the mind can at that point just say, well, I'm going on, and I'm going to create all time at this moment. So I think that when I go, I'm going to look for my daughters in my mind, and I'm going to go.
Yeah.
And I'll live forever. It's just like the people who have created this idea of heaven. Well, I think heaven can be real if you can create it in that microsecond before you go. If you and it's the same with hell. If you think you're going to hell and you create it in that microsecond, well, you're going to be weeping and gnashing your teeth and among the flames for eternity, because you are free of the burden of time. Time is a construct. I talk about that in my book. Do you know about the space-time theory?
A little, yeah.
Right. So, basically, all time exists simultaneously. So you can, if you forget about the linear processing of time, like we're doing right now, like when I did this, that was all delineated into,
or this.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
If you forget that, you're a baby in your hometown and wherever you were, and you're also laying there ready to take off, and you're also somewhere flying free as a spirit. You're all things at once. That's kind of the lesson that the people who died taught me, was that you can be everywhere all at once, and that's terrifying to these over identified people that late stage capitalism has made. We're holding on to our identity. This is my haircut, and this is my shirt, and these are the foods that I eat, and this is the car I drive. All that shit's not gonna matter.
Yeah. Let it go. I used to have this notion, I don't know where it came from, that it just came to me one time. What if every morning when we wake up at a different point in our lives? Like
Well,
tomorrow morning I'm 3 years old, I'm back there, or maybe not even back, I'm there. And then tomorrow I wake up and I'm 40 again, or whatever. And our mind instantly adjusts to what it is. And I also think of that, reminded me of that Billy Joe Shaver song, I'm gonna live forever, I'm gonna cross that river. Yeah. Jim,
but
thank you so much.
I got one thing to say. Kurt Vonnegut talks about what we're talking about here. He goes to heaven, and he finds out when you get to heaven, you can be whatever age you want to be. And so he's really excited because he gets to be 45 and drink martinis and stuff. But then he sees his father, and his father wanted to be 3. And now he has to take care of his father in heaven.
That's great. I love Vonnegut, man.
Oh, yeah.
Dan, thank you so much for doing this. It's just been an honor to speak with you. I'm a big fan. You're such a fascinating guy. I will put lots of links in the show notes. I'm going to order your book, and I wish you all the best. Thank you again so much, Jim.
Well, thank you for the good work that you're doing talking to people. I looked at who you have interviewed, and it seems like, like Will Johnson, I love, and Willie Valutin, and the various people that you are lifting up with your efforts. That's a beautiful thing. So thank you for that.
You bet, man. You take care.
Bye bye.
Take care.